He found the alien baby in the river. Soon, two alien women appeared at his home. The sun climbed slowly over the reed plains of Chiron 7. Mist rolled off the water in sheets, muffling sound and reducing everything to outlines of gray and green. Jaden Vale moved along the inlet in silence, a measuring pole in one hand, a slate strapped to his forearm. He had done this every morning for 3 years, recording the river's levels, logging silt deposits, and maintaining the gates that kept the border settlement supplied with clean water. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. After leaving the Federation Scout Corps, Jaden had wanted quiet, a job that didn't involve conflict or orders barked over comms. He had chosen the far edges of civilization for a reason. No politics, no campaigns, just numbers on a slate and a river that never lied. He thought peace would blunt the edge inside him. It hadn't, not entirely. The way he scanned the horizon without realizing, the way he kept his back to the solid side of a bank when he wrote. Those habits hadn't faded. They never would. He pressed the measuring pole into the shallows. It struck something soft but heavy. Not rock, not root. He prodded again. The reeds parted, and a pale bundle floated half-submerged. At first, his mind reached for the obvious answer. Discarded cloth, refuse dragged by the current. Then the bundle shifted. A faint sound broke the quiet. A thin, unsteady breath. Jaden froze. His pulse kicked hard, the way it had once done at ambush sites. He crouched, pulled the reeds apart, and saw the small face. A newborn, purple-skinned, veins faintly luminous beneath the surface, glowing weakly at wrists and temples. The infant blinked, lips blue, chest rising in shallow spasms. Shock rippled through him. He had seen dead children on campaign worlds, but not like this. Not alive and left adrift. His body acted before his mind caught up. Cloak off. Wrap tight. Chest to chest. Keep the heat. He stood with the baby against him, the bundle light as tools he carried daily, and started back toward his hut. Every step was deliberate. Running risked to stumble. Stumbling risked breaking the fragile life in his arms. His thoughts tightened in a sequence. Warm her, dry her, check airways, feed if possible. A soldier's triage drilled deep into muscle memory. Underneath the discipline was anger, cold and sharp at the idea of anyone discarding an infant to the river. He pressed it down. Anger wasted time. His hut stood at the bend of the inlet, raised on short stilts. Inside, the single room was orderly. Tools stacked by the wall, reed mats drying, a small iron stove beside the hearth. He laid the infant on a folded blanket near the fire pit, sparked tinder, and had flames in seconds. Heat built. He poured Orvan water into a pot, set it over the flame, and stripped another cloth into strips for swaddling. The baby's breath rasped but didn't fade. Jaden pressed his hand to the tiny chest, counting. Weak but steady. He worked quietly, speaking only once under his breath. You'll live. No one takes that from you. He set her against his skin, shirt open, sharing his warmth until color returned to her lips. When her grip closed unexpectedly around his thumb, he felt his throat tighten. It wasn't sentimentality. It was the weight of responsibility landing all at once. He hadn't chosen this, but he knew he wouldn't walk away. After an hour, the fire held, the infant slept swaddled in cloth, and the room smelled of Varan root broth simmering low. Jaden noted the time and place on his slate, the clan mark carved into the stone tied to the bundle. 2 overlapping circles cut by a line. He knew what it meant. Lineage, protection, belonging. Yet here it was, tied to abandonment. Reporting this to the settlement council would return the child to the same people who had thrown her away. He set the slate aside. He sat at the table with a mug of Ferlin seed coffee, listening to the soft sound of the child's breath. The decision was already made. She stayed. The question was how long before someone came looking. When a knock came 2 days later, 3 soft taps, hesitant, his chest tightened, not with surprise, but with confirmation. He rose without haste, hand brushing the knife on the counter, and opened the door. 2 women stood in the drizzle. Both were drenched, mud-streaked, and visibly exhausted. The elder, tall with long braided black hair, wore a shredded ceremonial wrap that revealed more than it covered. She carried herself upright, even while trembling from cold. Her eyes, a deep bronze glow, locked on him with a mix of suspicion and plea. The younger stood close beside her, cobalt streaks dyed into short hair, a torn work tunic tied at her waist, thighs bare. She looked him up and down in one sweep, shoulders, hands, eyes, testing him without words. The elder spoke first, her voice low but controlled. "You found child?" Jaden nodded. "I did. She is mine." The words cracked despite her control. The younger stepped forward, chin high. "I'm her sister. We were cast out for trying to stop what they did. We followed the redrag. We're not leaving her again." For a moment, Jaden studied them both. His mind ran through quick checks, posture, signs of deception, state of exhaustion. They were real. Desperate, starved, but real. He stepped aside. Fires lit. "Come in." The elder entered slowly, her eyes dropping to the floor, then to the bundle by the fire. She broke when she saw it, dropping to her knees, pulling the child into her arms, pressing her face to the infant's hair. Her shoulders shook once before she forced herself still again. The younger entered boldly, scanning every corner of the hut, then leaned against the table with deliberate ease. Her gaze came back to him, measuring. "You could have given her to the council." "I don't do that," he said. She tilted her head. "Good." Inside, Jaden felt the sharpness of a choice he had made without permission from anyone else. These women were trouble. Their presence meant attention, questions, perhaps pursuit from the same people who had discarded the baby. He didn't want it. But watching the mother rock her child in front of the fire, seeing her hold on with a desperation that barely held together, he knew he wasn't going to send them away. He poured broth into bowls and set them on the table. "Eat first," he said, his voice flat but steady. "Then we'll talk." The hut grew quiet except for the sound of spoons against bowls and the steady crackle of fire. For the first time in years, Jaden felt the stillness of his house break, and he didn't feel the urge to seal it back up. The hut smelled of broth and smoke, thick with the quiet sounds of people eating for the first time in days. Jaden sat opposite the two women, watching them without staring, letting them take what they needed. The elder, Serena, as she introduced herself between careful spoonfuls, kept the child in her lap even while she ate. Her hands trembled at first, not from fear, but from hunger and fatigue, and she slowed herself deliberately as if afraid of losing control in front of him. The younger one, Kaylin, ate fast, hunched over the bowl, then leaned back and wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist, her eyes darting to his shelves and tools as if she were cataloging what he owned. Questions hung unspoken in the room. Why had their people condemned the infant? Why had these women followed the river instead of leaving the child to fate? Why had Jaden, a man who once lived by orders, chosen to break the colony's own rules by keeping her? He knew the audience of any story would demand clarity, so he decided not to let the silence cover everything. "You both walked here from the high bank." His tone was calm, but the weight of the question was clear. The mud on their legs, the raw skin on their feet, the way their bodies sagged near the fire. All of it told him they hadn't come far with comfort. 2 days, Kaylin answered quickly, almost proudly, though her voice cracked at the end. "We cut across the flats. No one followed. They don't care enough to." Serena looked up, her eyes catching his with a mix of defiance and shame. "They called her cursed. Wrong blood. Said she'd bring sickness. I stood against it. They threw me out. My sister chose to leave with me. That is all." Jaden didn't answer right away. He watched the baby's faint glow under the skin, the rise and fall of her chest. The words "wrong blood" echoed in his head, bitter and familiar. On campaign worlds, he had seen children punished for parentage, for nothing they had done. He had sworn when he left that life behind that he wouldn't let politics dictate who deserved to live. This moment tested that promise. He poured more broth into their bowls. "She's healthy, weak from cold, nothing else. If anyone comes here asking, I'll say the river carried nothing but reeds." Kaylin smirked at that, a flicker of approval mixed with curiosity. "You don't sound like a man scared of councils or clans." "I've seen worse than councils," Jaden said, and that closed the subject. Serena shifted the baby in her lap. Her voice softened, almost breaking. She needs a name. Without one, she is just a shadow. She looked at him as if testing how much right he had in this matter. Jaden thought for a moment, then shook his head. That's for you to give, not me. Serenia's lips tightened. She whispered something in her own tongue. Low, melodic, private. Kaylin rolled her eyes. She'll argue with herself for days before deciding. That's what she does. Jaden leaned back on the bench. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then I'll keep her alive until you decide. The fire cracked. The room warmed further. For a moment, there was no sound except the baby's small breath and the steady tap of rain against the roof. Kaylin suddenly swung her legs off the table and leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Why you? She asked bluntly. Why did you take her out of the water? You could have turned your back and no one would have known. The question pressed hard. Jaden answered without embellishment. Because she was alive. That's enough. Kaylin studied him, her lips twitching between a smirk and something more serious. She didn't push again. Serenia finally eased into the chair with her child against her chest. The tension in her shoulders loosened fractionally. She murmured, "We will work. Clean. Mend. Gather reeds. We will not be a burden." Jaden shook his head. "Rest first. Work comes later." The hut settled into quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the pause before the shape of something new. Outside, the mist deepened, and somewhere in the reeds, a single whistle carried, a sound too deliberate to be an animal. Jaden's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise. Whoever had come close would see smoke, would smell broth, would know this hut wasn't empty anymore. Inside, 3 adults and 1 child sat around a fire. The story of why they had all ended up in this room was still raw and incomplete, but one thing had been set in motion. They weren't going to face the river's judgment alone. The rain tapered into a steady drizzle by morning, leaving the reed flats shining under a dull sky. Inside the hut, the fire had burned low, but warmth lingered in the air. Jaden rose first, careful not to wake the 2 women asleep near the hearth. Serenia had the child pressed tightly against her chest, her head tipped back against the wall, exhaustion etched deep into her face. Kaylin sprawled half across the bench, his cloak tangled around her legs, one arm thrown over her eyes. It looked like people who had finally stopped running. He added wood to the fire, the crackle stirring Kaylin awake. She blinked at him, then smirked faintly. "You don't sleep long, do you?" "Long enough," he answered. He didn't explain that years of military service had trained his body to rest in fragments and rise alert. Some habits never left, and maybe they never should. Kaylin sat up and pulled the cloak tighter, watching him with open curiosity. "People want to know," she said. "You skipped reporting yesterday. If they send a runner and find us here, what will you say?" It was a question hanging since the previous night. Jaden met her eyes. That no one came. That I saw no child. That nothing drifted from the river. He paused, voice calm but firm. "If I'm lying for all of you. That's not something I do lightly. Understand?" Her smirk faded. She nodded once, serious for the first time since arriving. Serenia stirred awake to the sound of their voices. She tightened her hold on the infant and sat forward. Her eyes moved to the table, where the clan-marked stone from the bundle still lay. She reached out, touched it, then pulled her hand back as if it burned. "You found this tied to her," she said quietly. "Yes," Jaden confirmed. "I recognize the mark. 2 circles. 1 cut." Kaylin muttered. "Their excuse. Old clan feud. Our mother married across the wrong line. To them, the child isn't pure enough to matter." Serenia's lips pressed into a hard line. They used the mark of protection as a brand of rejection. That is how far they've fallen. Jaden studied her carefully. He saw pride still burning under the fatigue, a woman who had resisted her people's decree and paid the price. "And if they learn she lives?" he asked. "They won't come," Serenia said, but her tone betrayed doubt. "They wanted her gone, and me with her. To them, we are already dead." That answer raised another question that hung heavy in the air. If they were truly cut off, where would they go? Jaden caught himself calculating supplies in his head. Grain stock, Varan roots, dried fish strips. while watching the two women trade glances across the fire. The truth was, they had nowhere else. He set 3 mugs on the table and poured the bitter Froen seed coffee. "Eat with me," he said, not as an offer, but as a rule. They did. Serena ate in silence, steady and deliberate. Kaelin leaned against the table, legs swinging again, but slower this time. The infant stirred only once, pressing small fingers against her mother's collarbone before falling back asleep. After the meal, Jaden stepped outside to check the gates. The mist had thinned, showing the wide stretch of reeds bending with the current. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Kaelin followed, cloak loose around her shoulders. "You live alone out here?" she asked. "Yes." "No wife? No children?" "No." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing the edges of him. People don't choose solitude unless they're hiding from something. He didn't flinch. "I'm not hiding. I'm finished with fighting." "That's different." She tilted her head. "But you still move like a soldier." He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the inlet where the water pressed against the gate. "If the flow builds too fast, the settlement loses crops. That's my mission now. Numbers, logs, balance." Kaelin studied the gate, then him, then gave a crooked smile. "Strange mission, but you seem stubborn enough to keep it." By the time they returned, Serena had cleaned the hearth and folded the blankets neatly, her posture as rigid as her words earlier. She looked at him, then at her sister. "We should go," she said suddenly. Kaelin turned fast. "Where?" Serena shook her head. "We bring danger to his door." Jaden cut in before the argument grew. "Leaving solves nothing. Out there, you starve. Here, you don't. Until you decide otherwise, you'll stay." His tone left no room for debate. Serena studied him for a long time, her jaw tight. Finally, she nodded once. It wasn't surrender, it was acknowledgement. The fire snapped. Rain ticked softly against the roof again. For the first time since finding the baby, Jaden felt a strange weight in his chest. He had taken them in without hesitation. Now he realized what that choice meant. Not just sheltering 2 women and a child, but tying his quiet life to theirs. The mission he had chosen after war, silence, water, order, was already gone. Something else was beginning in its place. And though part of him feared the consequences, another part knew he wasn't going to step back. That night, as the fire dimmed and the women lay close with the baby between them, Jaden sat awake longer than usual, listening to their breathing. The hut no longer felt empty. It felt watched, filled, claimed. He didn't know yet if that was comfort or danger, but he knew he had made his decision the moment he pulled the child from the river. The storm thickened that night, rain hitting the roof hard enough to drown out softer sounds. The hut stayed warm, but the air carried tension. Jaden sat by the fire, sharpening a small utility blade against a whetstone. The scrape of steel was steady, controlled, a rhythm he kept when his mind needed order. Across the room, Serena rocked the child slowly, her face unreadable in the glow of the coals. Kaelin lounged on the bench with his cloak draped around her shoulders, watching him with eyes that never quite stayed still. For all the food and warmth, questions lingered unanswered. Who exactly were these women outside of the fragments they had shared? How far had they come before reaching his door? And what did they want from him now that he had chosen to keep them inside? He spoke first, not lifting his eyes from the blade. "What was your place before this?" Serena looked up sharply, then lowered her gaze to the baby in her arms. "I was meant for the rights of the clan, a keeper of names, a recorder of lineages. When I refused their judgment on her, they called me defiled." Her voice was steady, but her hands clenched around the swaddled infant. "I lost my role the moment I chose her over them." Kaelin cut in quickly, almost mocking. "And me? I was nothing special. A laborer, field work, carrying, hauling, running errands. When they pushed her out, I followed. That's my story." She leaned back, a half-smile tugging at her mouth. "Not as noble as hers." Jaden set the blade aside. "Noble doesn't matter here. Survival does." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was waiting. Serena glanced at him, a trace of suspicion in her eyes. "Why do you care? You could have sent us away and returned to your quiet work. Why taking a burden not your own?" He didn't answer immediately. He poured 3 cups of hot Orvan water, slid one toward each of them, and spoke low. Because I've seen what happens when everyone looks away. I've done enough of that. Not again. Serenia studied him, but Kalen gave a short laugh, covering the edge of discomfort with bravado. So you're the kind who can't walk past a burning house without stepping inside. Dangerous trait, archivist. I'll take dangerous over empty, he said simply. Later, when the fire dimmed, practical needs brought them closer. Serenia's hair was still caked with dried mud from the riverbanks, and the baby's wrappings were damp. Jaden filled the basin with warm water and placed clean cloths nearby. He didn't offer. He simply set it ready. Serenia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable exposing any weakness, but the baby fussed and necessity won. She bent over the basin, dipping cloths to wipe the child clean. Jaden noticed her hands shaking from fatigue. Without asking, he moved beside her and took one of the cloths, running it through the water and handing it back. Where her hand brushed his, her breath caught. She didn't thank him, didn't speak at all, but her shoulders eased slightly. The smallest gestures mattered more than words. Kalen, watching from the bench, narrowed her eyes. Careful, she teased, though her voice was softer than usual. She doesn't trust men easily. Not after what our clan did. Serenia shot her a warning look, but Kalen ignored it, continuing with a crooked grin. But you're different, aren't you? Quiet, stubborn, not afraid of our shame. Jaden didn't rise to it. He wrung out another cloth, handed it to Serenia, and said only, "The child comes first. Everything else waits." The words settled in the air heavier than they should have. Serenia's lips parted as if she wanted to challenge him, then closed again. Her eyes dropped to the baby. Kalen tilted her head, intrigued, as if she had heard more in his tone than he had meant to give away. By the time the fire burned low to embers, the baby was clean and wrapped in fresh cloth. Serenia sat back with her daughter tucked against her chest, exhaustion softening the edges of her pride. Kalen stretched out on the bench, arms folded behind her head, still watching Jaden with a look that was less mocking now, more curious. Jaden banked the fire and lay down near the door, where he could reach it first if anyone knocked again. His body stayed tense even as fatigue pressed down. He listened to the rain, the baby's soft breathing, the uneven rhythm of 2 women trying to rest in a stranger's house. Before sleep claimed him, a single thought pressed sharp in his mind. He had pulled 1 life from the river, but in doing so, he had pulled 3 more into his own. Whatever quiet mission he thought he had chosen on this world, measuring rivers, recording flows, was already gone. Something far more complicated had taken its place, and he knew there was no turning it back. The storm thickened that night, rain hitting the roof hard enough to drown out softer sounds. The hut stayed warm, but the air carried tension. Jaden sat by the fire, sharpening a small utility blade against a whetstone. The scrape of steel was steady, controlled, a rhythm he kept when his mind needed order. Across the room, Serenia rocked the child slowly, her face unreadable in the glow of the coals. Kalen lounged on the bench with his cloak draped around her shoulders, watching him with eyes that never quite stayed still. For all the food and warmth, questions lingered unanswered. Who exactly were these women outside of the fragments they had shared? How far had they come before reaching his door? And what did they want from him now that he had chosen to keep them inside? He spoke first, not lifting his eyes from the blade. "What was your place before this?" Serenia looked up sharply, then lowered her gaze to the baby in her arms. "I was meant for the rights of the clan, a keeper of names, a recorder of lineages. When I refused their judgment on her, they called me defiled." Her voice was steady, but her hands clenched around the swaddled infant. "I lost my role the moment I chose her over them." Kalen cut in quickly, almost mocking. "And me? I was nothing special. A laborer, field work, carrying, hauling, running errands. When they pushed her out, I followed. That's my story." She leaned back, a half smile tugging at her mouth. "Not as noble as hers." Jaden set the blade aside. "Noble doesn't matter here. Survival does." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was waiting, Serenia glanced at him, a trace of suspicion in her eyes. Why do you care? You could have sent us away and returned to your quiet work. Why take in a burden not your own? He didn't answer immediately. He poured 3 cups of hot Orvan water, slid one toward each of them, and spoke low. Because I've seen what happens when everyone looks away. I've done enough of that. Not again. Serenia studied him, but Kalen gave a short laugh, covering the edge of discomfort with bravado. So you're the kind who can't walk past a burning house without stepping inside. Dangerous trait, archivist. I'll take dangerous over empty, he said simply. Later, when the fire dimmed, practical needs brought them closer. Serenia's hair was still caked with dried mud from the riverbanks, and the baby's wrappings were damp. Jaden filled the basin with warm water and placed clean cloths nearby. He didn't offer. He simply set it ready. Serenia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable exposing any weakness, but the baby fussed and necessity won. She bent over the basin, dipping cloths to wipe the child clean. Jaden noticed her hands shaking from fatigue. Without asking, he moved beside her and took one of the cloths, running it through the water and handing it back. When her hand brushed his, her breath caught. She didn't thank him, didn't speak at all, but her shoulders eased slightly. The smallest gestures mattered more than words. Kalen, watching from the bench, narrowed her eyes. Careful, she teased, though her voice was softer than usual. She doesn't trust men easily. Not after what our clan did. Serenia shot her a warning look, but Kalen ignored it, continuing with a crooked grin. But you're different, aren't you? Quiet, stubborn, not afraid of our shame. Jaden didn't rise to it. He wrung out another cloth, handed it to Serenia, and said only, "The child comes first. Everything else waits." The words settled in the air heavier than they should have. Serenia's lips parted as if she wanted to challenge him, then closed again. Her eyes dropped to the baby. Kalen tilted her head, intrigued, as if she had heard more in his tone than he had meant to give away. By the time the fire burned low to embers, the baby was clean and wrapped in fresh cloth. Serenia sat back with her daughter tucked against her chest, exhaustion softening the edges of her pride. Kalen stretched out on the bench, arms folded behind her head, still watching Jaden with a look that was less mocking now, more curious. Jaden banked the fire and lay down near the door, where he could reach it first if anyone knocked again. His body stayed tense even as fatigue pressed down. He listened to the rain, the baby's soft breathing, the uneven rhythm of 2 women trying to rest in a stranger's house. Before sleep claimed him, a single thought pressed sharp in his mind. He had pulled 1 life from the river, but in doing so, he had pulled 3 more into his own. Whatever quiet mission he thought he had chosen on this world, measuring rivers, recording flows, was already gone. Something far more complicated had taken its place, and he knew there was no turning it back. The next day began with fog crawling low across the flats, thick enough that the river looked like a sheet of dull glass. The hut was quiet except for the hiss of boiling water on the stove and the faint stirrings of the infant. Jaden stood at the window slit, scanning the mist with the practiced stillness of a man who didn't trust silence. He told himself it was habit, yet the truth was clear. Ever since the child had entered his home, he listened differently. Every sound outside could be someone deciding that what he had taken and should have been left to drown. Behind him, Serenia rose slowly from the bedding, her daughter nestled against her chest. She adjusted the shirt Jaden had given her, the collar sliding loose on one shoulder. Her movements were graceful but tight, as if every small task was weighed against exhaustion. She caught him watching and asked the question directly, without preamble. "You still expect them to come, don't you?" Jaden kept his gaze on the mist. "Expect? No. Prepare? Always." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned her face toward the fire, hiding what she didn't want him to see. Fear, maybe guilt, maybe both. Kalen woke a few moments later, hair tangled, pulling his cloak tight around her like it belonged to her now. She swung her legs over the bench and grinned lazily. If he's waiting for them, let him. I say they'll never bother. Our people don't chase what they already buried. She leaned forward, her grin sharp. But I don't mind him keeping guard. Makes me feel spoiled. Serenia gave her sister a sharp look, but Kaylin shrugged, unashamed. Jaden ignored the bait, busy ladling Varen root broth into bowls. He placed them on the table without ceremony. When they ate, Serenia spoke again, softer this time. If we stay, we need more than fire and broth. We need a name for her. She looked down at the infant, fingers brushing the small, glowing veins beneath her skin. Without one, she's only a reminder of what they threw away. Jaden said nothing at first. He knew the weight of naming. In the old Corps, a name could be the only anchor a soldier had left. Finally, he spoke. Then name her. Not for them. For you. Serenia's throat tightened. She looked to Kaylin, but Kaylin only shrugged, hiding her own unease with a smirk. Don't look at me. You carried her. The silence stretched, broken only by the child's soft breathing. Then Serenia whispered, Nigh. The word was simple, quick, but final. It means small light. Jaden repeated it once low, letting it settle. Nigh. He looked at the baby. That fits. Kaylin grinned, softer now. Finally, a word we can use instead of the child. She leaned back, satisfied. As dusk fell, they stepped outside together, Nigh swaddled in Serenia's arms. The mist cleared just enough to show the river's faint glow where moss and hydro lights shimmered under the current. Serenia dipped her hand in, wet her fingers, and brushed them gently across her daughter's forehead. This river carried you, but it didn't take you. You are ours. Her voice was steady now, no longer broken by guilt. Kaylin stood close, one hand on her sister's arm, the other gripping the reed railing like she dared anyone to challenge the moment. Jaden watched them both, arms folded, and for the first time he felt not just responsibility, but belonging. When they returned to the hut, Kaylin draped his cloak over Serenia's shoulders without asking. Serenia didn't protest. Jaden stoked the fire, the glow painting the three of them in warm light. That night, the air in the hut was different. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. Naming the child had changed something unseen. The house no longer felt like a shelter for strangers. It felt like the beginning of a family no one had planned, but none of them seemed ready to walk away from. Jaden lay awake near the door as usual, but instead of counting the seconds between raindrops, he found himself listening to the rhythm of Nigh's breathing. It was fragile, steady, and undeniable, a sound that now defined the hut more than silence ever had. The days that followed unfolded with a rhythm that none of them had planned, but all of them began to accept. Morning meant firelight, the sharp scent of Ferland's seed coffee, and Nye's soft whimpering that pulled Serenia from restless dreams. Noon meant simple meals, Draxon mushrooms fried with Zyron crumbs or thin root broth stretched longer than it should, and quiet work around the inlet. Evening meant silence, but not the empty silence Jaden had once lived with. Now it was filled with breath, with shifting bodies, with the fragile weight of trust that was still learning how to stand. That evening, the three of them sat close around the fire, Nye asleep in her sling. Serenia adjusted the cloth, her fingers trembling more from nerves than fatigue. She kept stealing glances at Jaden, as though measuring him for something she wasn't ready to name. Kaylin, sprawled on the bench with one knee bent, watched her sister with a small grin and then shifted her gaze deliberately toward him. You're careful with her, Kaylin said, nodding at how he checked the sling without being asked. Most men wouldn't bother. Jaden didn't look away from the flames. Most men aren't here. Serenia's lips tightened at the remark, half a scold, half a secret relief. She stroked her daughter's head and finally asked the question that had been waiting since their arrival. Why don't you keep your distance? We're strangers. Worse, cast-outs. You could have saved yourself the risk by letting us pass. Jaden turned then, his gaze steady but not unkind. Because once someone's in this house, they're not strangers. You wanted her alive. So did I. That's enough for me. The room fell into stillness. Serenia lowered her eyes, not ready to let him see how much those words struck. Kaylin tilted her head, grinned softer now. You talk like someone who's already chosen. Maybe you don't realize it. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached across the fire and refilled Serenia's mug. She took it, her fingers brushing his for the first time without pulling back. The contact was brief, but it lingered in the air long after. Later, when Nye finally settled into deep sleep, Serena stretched out against the wall, exhausted. Kaylin moved closer to Jaden on the bench, her voice dropping low so her sister couldn't hear. "You know she's scared," she whispered. "She thinks you'll wake one morning and decide we're too heavy to carry. That's why she watches you like that, waiting for the blow that never comes." Jaden didn't shift his eyes from the fire. "Then I'll make sure it never comes." Kaylin studied him in silence, then leaned back, satisfied. "Good, because if you hurt her, you answer to me first." Her grin returned, but this time it was protective, not teasing. The night stretched, the storm outside gone, replaced by a calm drizzle tapping against the roof. The three of them ended up sleeping closer than before. Serena against the wall with Nye, Kaylin curled near the fire, and Jaden on the bench, the line between them thinner than ever. It wasn't planned, but in the middle of the night, Serena shifted, half asleep, and her shoulder brushed his. She didn't pull away. Jaden lay still, awake now, feeling the weight of her head resting against him in the dark. Kaylin stirred and opened one eye, saw the closeness, and smirked faintly before turning back toward the fire. The hut that had once been empty now carried heat, not just from the flames, but from something building between them. Something fragile, dangerous, and undeniable. By morning, nothing was said of it, but the silence had changed. It no longer belonged to strangers. It belonged to people slowly deciding whether they could risk belonging to one another. Dawn came with pale light cutting through the mist. The hut smelled of smoke, wet reed, and the faint sweetness of larn porridge warming on the fire. Jaden sat at the table, sharpening a short blade out of habit, the sound steady and deliberate. Serena moved quietly across the room. Nye pressed against her chest, the baby's tiny hand curling into the loose collar of his shirt she still wore. Kaylin leaned against the doorway with her arms folded, watching both of them, her grin smaller but steadier than it had ever been. The air was different that morning. It wasn't tense. It wasn't filled with questions of whether they would stay or go. It carried a weight, yes, but not of fear. The weight of something decided, though none of them had spoken it out loud. Serena broke the silence first. Her voice was even, but her eyes betrayed the fear she still carried. "If we remain here, if this becomes our life, what does that make us to you? Are we burdens? Guests? Or something else?" Jaden set down the blade and met her gaze head-on. His answer came without hesitation. "Family, if you choose it." Kaylin let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Just like that? You decide and it's done." "No," Jaden said, his tone calm but unyielding. "I decided for myself the moment I pulled her from the river. But family is something you have to choose, too. Both of you." He looked between them. "So what do you want?" The fire popped, filling the silence. Serena's throat worked as she tried to speak. Her pride warred with her exhaustion, her fear of rejection against the fragile hope she hadn't let herself feel in days. She finally lowered her head, kissed Nye's crown, and whispered, "I want her safe. I want her to grow where no one calls her cursed." She lifted her eyes to Jaden's. "If that means staying, then yes. I choose this." Kaylin pushed away from the doorway, walked to the table, and dropped into the chair opposite him. She smirked faintly, but her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "You think I'd leave her to do this alone?" "No. If she stays, I stay. You'll have to live with both of us." Jaden allowed himself the smallest smile. "That's what I want." The decision settled over the room like a door closing on the past. No hesitation remained. They had named the child, shared food, shared nights by the fire. Now they shared a future. That evening, they cooked what little they had left, fried Draxon mushrooms, Zyron crumbs brown crisp, a thin broth made heavier with herbs. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a celebration. Serena ate slowly, careful as always. Kaylin teased him about the way he chopped roots too evenly, though her grin was full rather than sharp. Nye cooed softly in her sling, as if sensing the calm that had finally filled the hut. When night came, the fire burned low, shadows stretching long across the walls. Serenia laid nigh in the cradle they had fashioned from an old fish crate, lined with cloth, and for the first time, her shoulders didn't tighten when she stepped back. She turned toward Jaden, hesitation in her eyes, but instead of pulling away, she allowed herself to sit beside him. Kaylin joined on his other side, draping the cloak over all three of them, her head resting against his shoulder with casual familiarity. It didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Small touches replaced words. Serenia's fingers brushing his hand, Kaylin's knee pressing lightly against his arms settling around both of them in quiet acceptance. The warmth that grew between them wasn't hurried, wasn't forced. It was trust, earned slowly through firelight and silence, and the choice not to look away from one another. When they finally lay down, tangled close with Nye's soft breathing steady near the fire, Jaden understood something with a clarity sharper than any order he had once followed. This was no longer a house of one. It was theirs, bound not by law or clan, but by choice. Morning would bring the same routine, river gates, broth, firewood, but it would no longer feel like survival alone. It would feel like the work of a family. And in the quiet, as Serenia's head rested against his chest and Kaylin's laugh still lingered in his ears, Jaden knew this was the ending he had never expected, but the only one that made sense. They had been thrown away. He had chosen to keep them. Together, they had built something no council, no clan, no river could ever erase. It was the end of one story and the beginning of another. One they would write every day in the small details of staying, surviving, and finally belonging. Days later, the river ran clear and slow, the flats bright under a high, colorless sky. The hut had changed in small ways that meant everything. Nye's fish crate cradle now, painted with a thin stripe of cobalt dye Kaylin found in her bundle. Serenia's careful stitching along the door curtain to keep out the night bugs. Jaden's measuring slate moved from the table to a hook where little hands couldn't reach. Their routines had settled. Gate checks at dawn, drying reed mats by mid-morning, a shared meal, then quiet tasks while Nye slept. Peace wasn't a performance anymore. It was just the shape of their days. On a soft afternoon, Jaden returned from the inlet with damp sleeves and a rare ease in his shoulders. Kaylin stood barefoot on the threshold, sun on her hair streaks, turning a length of coil cord into a sling for firewood. "You're late," she said, smiling like it was a private joke. "Water level fell 2 notches," he said. "Storm drains cleared themselves. For once, the river worked with me." "Maybe it learned we bite," Kaylin said, stepping close to tug at his cuff, wringing out a line of water with quick, practiced fingers. Serenia's inside. She's teaching Nye to hold a spoon. It's mostly chaos. Inside, the scene matched the promise. Serenia sat cross-legged on the floor, Nye steady in the crook of her arm, both of them streaked with Larn porridge. The baby's hand lifted the wooden spoon, then missed her mouth and tapped Serenia's chin instead. Serenia laughed, a low, surprised sound that still felt new in the room. Jaden leaned on the doorframe and watched them for a moment that lasted longer than he intended. "Report," he asked, voice soft. "Training is effective," Serenia said, deadpan, then her composure cracked. She turned the spoon and guided Nye's hand again. "She learns fast." Kaylin dropped her bundle, sweeping porridge from the floor with a cloth. "You're both terrible at being stern," she said, but her grin softened the words. She flicked a dot of porridge at Jaden's boot and dared him to notice. He did, and let it go. "I have a thing for you," he said, reaching into his coat. He set a small reed whistle on the table, a neat, hollowed piece bound with thin copper wire. "For Nye, when she's older." Serenia touched it with one finger, then looked up at him. Something unguarded moved in her face, gratitude that didn't need language. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. "She will carry sound from this house wherever she goes." They ate early, Draxon mushrooms crisped in oil, Zyron crumbs toasted in the pan, thin Varan broth thickened with herb scrapings. Nye slept soon after, a small, slow breath in the cradle. Dusk pressed against the window, and the hut grew quieter than usual, not with worry, but with the hum of a decision none of them had spoken aloud. Jaden lit a single hydro lamp. The pale glow flattened shadows and left their faces clear. Serenia stood and crossed to him with a calm he recognized from nights when she chose to speak truths. She stopped close enough that he could see the faint shimmer along her skin where the light caught. "You've given us a home," she said. "I want to give something back that isn't food or mending." "You already have," he said. "Not like this," she answered, and the quiet around the words told him exactly what she meant. Kalen's gaze flicked between them, playful at first, then serious. "If we do this," she said softly, "we do it right. No pretending one of us is a shadow." Jaden nodded once. "No shadows." Serenia looked to her sister, and whatever needed saying passed between them without sound. She turned back to Jaden. "We decide together. We move together. We stop when anyone says stop." "Agreed," he said. There was no rush. Kalen reached first, testing the space with 2 fingers at his wrist, then flattening her palm to feel his pulse. "Still steady," she murmured, amused and reassured at once. Serenia stepped in on his other side, her hand rising to his jaw, thumb brushing the bristle there like she'd wondered about it for days, and finally allowed herself to check. He didn't move. He let them lead. They learned him in small, unhurried pieces. Kalen's quick curiosity settling into patience when his breath deepened, Serenia's measured focus loosening as his hands, careful and sure, found where to hold and where to wait. Fabric slid without drama. Kalen tugging his cloak from her own shoulders and draping it over the 3 of them like a shared flag. Serenia easing the collar of his shirt, then stealing it entirely with a brief, unguarded smile that felt like sunlight. The hydro lamp's pale ring held the room steady while the fire kept a low, comforting heat. No words explained what didn't need explanation. When Kalen's teasing rose too sharp, she caught herself and softened it with a kiss at the corner of his mouth. When Serenia tensed at an old reflex, protect, withdraw, Jaden's hand stilled, open and waiting, until she exhaled and guided him back with her own. He was strong in the way they needed. Not pushing, not withholding, but setting a rhythm that asked, checked, then followed. Their breath found a shared pace. The closeness built in layers, warmth, then trust, then a deeper pull that even silence couldn't hide. They shifted to the floor on the blankets, the cloak pulled up to frame their small circle. Kalen lay along his side, one leg hooked over his with a boldness that made her grin and then go quiet when he traced the line of her calf with his palm. Serenia straddled his hips with deliberate care, her hair falling forward until he smoothed it back, his fingers threading the braid ties and pausing at the pulse point behind her ear. She watched his eyes, gauging, adjusting, choosing. When she lowered herself, it was with a calm certainty that said she had weighed fear against desire and picked what would carry them forward. He held her and took his time, letting her set the depth and pace, meeting her with a steadiness that never wavered. Kalen's hand slid across his chest, found the old scar at his rib, and stilled there like a claim. "Stubborn," she whispered, as if the word itself was a compliment. When he turned to her, she kissed him, slow, greedy for a second, then laughing into his mouth at her own lack of restraint, until Serenia leaned down to kiss them both, softening the edges, blending heat into something whole. No one rushed. No one reached for more than the others offered. Every escalation was a question. Every answer came as touch and breath. Time thinned. The river outside kept its steady push, indifferent, while inside the house the 3 of them learned a language of each other's bodies. What made Kalen go quiet and focused? What made Serenia relax from spine to shoulders? What made Jaden's control slip just enough to show he was as human as he looked? When anyone needed to slow, a fingertip pressed to a wrist was enough. When it was time to follow through, a hand at the nape guided them back in. The heat crested not in a shout, but in a deep, shared release that left them still and grinning and a little surprised at how right it felt. After, the room settled into small, intimate noises. Cloth pulled up, a soft exhale, the click of the lamp turned lower. Serenia lay with her cheek on Jaden's chest, her breathing calm, one palm spread over his heart as if measuring its promise. Kalen sprawled half across both of them like a warm, possessive cat, tracing idle shapes on his shoulder with a finger stained earlier by cobalt dye. "So, she said, voice husky, almost shy. We did that. We did, Serenia answered, and the quiet pride in her tone was new and strong. Jaden kissed Serenia's hairline, then Kalen's temple, and let his eyes close for a beat. He felt the weight of them. Welcome, chosen real. Home, he said, testing the word aloud, and neither woman corrected him. Nye stirred once in the cradle, a small sound that made all three of them listen in the same instant. Serenia lifted her head, but the baby settled again. Kalen chuckled softly. Our guard changes got complicated, she said. 3 sets of ears. The river never had a chance. Good, Jaden said. They slept like that for a while, tangled under the cloak, the fire low and even. When dawn pressed at the window, Jaden rose first to stoke the stove. He moved quietly, but not like a man trying not to be seen. He set water to heat, sliced varan root thin, measured furlan seeds by feel. Serenia joined him, wrapping his shirt around herself without apology. She took the knife from his hand and finished the chopping because her lines were neater than his today. Kalen patted over, stole a heel of Zyron bread, and popped it into Jaden's mouth with a grin that dared him to complain. They ate at the table together, shoulders touching. Plans formed in ordinary words. I'll check the southern gate, Jaden said. Both of you take the reed line by the shallows. Watch for soft ground. Serenia nodded. I'll mend the door seam while Nye naps. Kalen lifted the reed whistle and blew a soft, clumsy note that made Nye kick in her sleep. I'll teach her to use this before she can walk, she declared, then softened. When she's ready. Outside, the river kept its work. Inside, the house had a new one. The day moved forward in small tasks that felt different now, not because the jobs had changed, but because the bond had. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no knocks on the wall, no watchers in the mist. Just a man, 2 women, and a child making life with the tools at hand and a promise they didn't need to carve in a stone to keep. At dusk, they carried Nye to the inlet. The sky held a clean band of light over the reeds. Serenia dipped her fingers and touched water to the baby's brow. Kalen stood with her shoulder against Jaden's, solid and light at the same time. He wrapped an arm around both of them and felt the quiet thrum of something that would last because they would choose it again tomorrow. Back at the hut, he hung the measuring slate by the door and, on a clear corner, scratched a small note with the day's mark. Flow steady. How steady? Family steady. Serenia read it, smiled once, and kissed him without ceremony. Kalen flicked the hydro lamp higher and said, Good. Then tomorrow we make Furlan coffee stronger. Jaden nodded. Stronger is fine. The river world of Chiron. 7 went on, indifferent and patient. Their house did too, no longer a stopgap against cold, but a place that held heat because they put it there again and again. Nothing chased them. Nothing needed to. They had reached the ending they earned, quiet, chosen, complete, and the beginning that always follows it.